Hey, and welcome back to Chapter 4, Storytime of the Darkest Minds by Alexandra Bracken. Now, if you haven't heard the previous chapters, please go back to the videos and you can go ahead and hear those. But if you're a newcomer, please hit that like button, hit that subscribe, and join our Storytime Club. If you want, go ahead, grab some snacks and some drinks, and let's get into Chapter 4, shall we? I awoke to cold water and a woman's soft voice. "You're all right," she was saying. "You'll be fine." I'm not sure who she thought she was fooling with her sweet little BS, but it wasn't me. I let her bring the wet towel up to my face again, savoring her warmth. As she leaned in closer, she smelled of rosemary and past things. For a second, just one, her hand came to rest against mine, and it was almost more than I could take. I wasn't at home, and this woman wasn't my mother. I started gasping desperately to keep everything inside me. I couldn't cry, not in front of her or any of the other adults. I wouldn't give them the pleasure. "Are you still in pain?" The only reason I opened my eyes was because she pulled them open herself. One at a time, shining an intense light in each, I tried to throw my hands up to shield them, but they had been strapped down in Velcro cuffs. Fighting against the restraints were pointless. The woman clucked her tongue and stepped back, taking her flowery fragrance with her. The smell of antiseptic and peroxide flooded the air, and I knew exactly where I was. The sounds of Thurman's Infirmary faded in and out in even waves. Some kid crying out in pain, boots clipping against the white tile floors, the creak of wheelchairs wheel. I felt like I was standing above a tunnel with my ear to the ground, listening to the hum of cars passing beneath me. "Ruby?" The woman was wearing blue scrubs and a white coat. With her pale skin and white blonde hair, she all but disappeared into the thin curtain that had been pulled around my bed. She caught me staring and smiled, so wide and so pretty. The woman was the youngest doctor I'd ever seen in Thurman, though admittedly I could count my trips to the infirmary on one hand. I went once for the stomach flu and dehydration after what Sam called my gut puking spectacular, and once for a sprained wrist. Both times I felt far worse after being groped by a pair of wrinkly hands than I had before I'd come in. Nothing cures a cold faster than the thought of an old perv wearing a cologne of alcohol and lemon hand soap. This woman, she was unreal. Everything about her. My name is Dr. Begbie. I'm a volunteer with the Leda Corporation. I nodded, glancing at the gold swan insignia on her coat pocket. She leaned in closer. We're a big medical company that does research and sends doctors in to help care for you guys at the camps. If it makes you feel comfortable, you're more than welcome to call me Kate. And leave off the doctor business. Sure, I was. I stared at the hand she extended towards me. Silence hung between us, punctuated by the pounding in my head. After an awkward moment, Dr. Bigby stuffed her hands back into the pocket of her lab coat, but not before letting it stray over the restraint, securing my hand to the bed's guard rail. Do you know why you're here, Ruby? Do you remember what happened? Before or after the tower tried to fry my brains, but I couldn't say it out loud. When it came to the adults, it was better not to talk. They had a way of hearing one thing and processing it as something else. No reason to give them that excuse to hurt you. It had been 8 months since I'd used my voice. I wasn't even sure I remembered how. The doctor somehow guessed the question I was barely holding back at the tip of my tongue. They turned on the comm control. After a fight broke out in the mess hall, it seems that things got a bit out of hand. That was an understatement. The white noise, comm control, the higher powers called it, was used to settle us down, so to speak, while it did absolutely nothing to them. It was like a dog whistle. The pitch tuned perfectly, and our freak brains could pick it up and process it. They turned it on for a whole host of reasons, sometimes for things as small as a kid accidentally using their ability, or to stamp out unruliness in one of the cabins. But in both of those instances, they would have piped the noise directly into whatever building the kids were in. If they used it across the camp, blasting it over the speakers for all of us to hear, then things must have gotten really out of hand. They must have been worried that there was a spark that would have set the rest of us ablaze. There was no hint of hesitation on Dr. Bixby's face as she unstrapped my wrists and ankles. The towel she had been using to clean my face hung limp in the guardrail, on the guardrail. Dripping water, bright red splotches soaked through its white fabric. I reached up and touched my mouth, my cheeks, my nose. When I pulled my fingers away, I was only half surprised to see that they were coated with dark blood. It was crusted between my nostrils and lips, as if someone had clocked me right in the hunger. Trying to sit up was the worst idea that crossed my mind. My chest screamed in pain, and I was flat on my back again before I even registered falling. Dr. Bigby was beside me in an instant, cranking the metal bed into an upright position. You have some bruised ribs, she said. I tried to take a deep breath, but my chest was too tight to inhale anything more then a choked gasp. She must not have noticed, because she was looking at me with those kind of eyes again, saying, "May I ask a few questions?" The fact that she asked my permission was amazing in and of itself. I studied her, searching for the hatred buried beneath the layer of pleasantness on her face, the fear hovering in her soft eyes, the disgust caught in the corner of her smile. Nothing, not even annoyance. Some poor kid started to throw up in the stall to my right. I could see his dark outline like a shadow against the curtain. There was no one sitting with him, no one holding his hand, just him and his bowl of puke. And here I was, my heart skipping beats out of fear that the fairy tale princess sitting next to me was going to have me put down like a rabid dog. She didn't know what I was saying. She couldn't have known. "You're being paranoid," I told myself. "Get a grip." Dr. Begbie pulled a pen out of her messy bun. "Ruby, when they turned on the comm machine, do you remember falling forward and hitting your face?" "No," I said. "I was already on the ground. I didn't know how much to tell her." The smile on her face stretched, and there was something smug about it. "Do you usually experience this much pain and bleeding from the column control?" Suddenly, the pain in my chest had nothing to do with my ribs. "I'll take that as a no." I couldn't see what she was writing, only that her hand and pen were flying across the paper, scribbling as though her life depended on it. I always took the white noise harder than the other girls in the cabin, but blood? Never. Dr. Begbie was humming lightly under her breath as she wrote some song that I thought might have been by the Rolling Stones. "She's with the camp controllers," I reminded myself. "She is one of them. But in another world, she might have not been." Even though she was wearing the scrubs and white coat, Dr. Begbie didn't look much older than I was. She had a young face, and it was probably a curse to her in the outside world. I had always thought that people born before Generation Freak were the lucky ones. They lived without fear of what happened when they stepped over the border between childhood and adolescence. As far as I knew, if you were older than 13 when they started rounding kids up, you were home free. You got to pass freak camp on the board game of life and head straight to Normalville. But looking at Dr. Begbie now, seeing the deep lines carved in her face that no one in their 20s should have had, I wasn't so sure they had gotten off scot-free. They'd gotten a better deal than what we ended up with, though. Abilities, powers that defied explanation, mental talents so freakish doctors and scientists reclassified our generation as PSI. We were no longer humans. Our brains broke that mold. I see from your chart that you were classified as abnormal intelligence in sorting, Dr. Bigby said after a while. The scientist that sorted you, did he run you through all of the tests? Something very cold coiled in my stomach. I might not have understood a great many things about the world. I might have only had a fourth grader's education, but I could tell when something was trying to fish around for information. The PSFs had switched over to outright scare tactics years ago, but there was a time when all of their questioning had been done in soft voice. Fake sympathy reeked like bad breath. Does she know? Maybe she ran a few tests while I was unconscious and scanned my brain or tested my blood or something. My fingers curled one by one until both hands were tight fists. I tried to work the line of thought through, but I kept getting caught on the possibilities. Fear made things hazy and light. Her question hung in the air, suspended somewhere between truth and lie. The clip of boots against the pristine tile floor forced my eyes up, away from the doctor's face. Each step was a warning, and I knew they were coming before Dr. Begbie turned her head. She moved to push herself away from the bed, but I didn't let her. I don't know what possessed me. I grabbed her wrist, the list of punishment for touching an authoritative figure running through my head like a skipping CD, each scratch sharper than the next. We weren't supposed to touch anyone, not even each other. It was different this time. I whispered, the words aching in my throat. My voice sounded different to my ears, weak. Dr. Bigby only had enough time to nod. The slightest movement, almost imperceptible, before a hand ripped back the curtain. I had seen the PSI Special Forces officer before. Sam called him the Grinch because he looked like he had stepped straight out of the movie, save for no green skin. The Grinch cast one look at me, his top lip peeling back in annoyance, before waving the doctor forward. She blew out a sigh and set her clipboard down on my lap. "Thank you, Ruby," she said. "If your pain gets any worse, call for help, okay?" Was she on drugs? Who was going to help? The kid throwing up? His stomach lining next door? I nodded. Anyway. Watching her turn to go, the last glimpse I had of her was her hand dragging the curtain back around. It was nice of her to give me privacy, but a little naive, given the black cameras hanging down between the beds. The bulbs were installed all over Thurman, lidless eyes always watching, never blinking. There were 2 cameras in our cabin alone, one on each end of the room, as well as one outside the door. It seemed like overkill, but when I was first brought to the camp, there were so few of us that they really could watch us all day, every day, until their brains were ready to burst from boredom. You had to squint to see it, but a tiny red light inside the black eye was the only clue that the camera had zeroed in on you. Over the years, as more and more kids were brought into Thurman on the old school bus, Sam and I began to notice that the cameras in our cabin no longer had the blinking red lights, not every day. Same went for the cameras in the laundry, the washrooms, and the mess hall. I guess with 3,000 kids spread out over a square mile, it was impossible to watch everyone all the time. Still, they watched enough to put the fear of God in us. You had a better than average chance of being busted if you practice your abilities, even under the cover of darkness. Those blinking lights were the exact same shade as the blood red band the PSFs wore around the upper part of their right arm. The symbol was stitched on the crimson fabric, indicating their unfortunate role as caretakers for the country's freak children. The camera above my bed had no red light. That relief came over me at the realization actually made the air taste sweet. For just a moment, I was alone and unobserved at Thurman. That was an almost unheard of luxury. Dr. Begbie, Kate, hadn't completely closed the curtain. When another doctor hurried past, the thin white fabric pulled back further, following a familiar flash of blue to catch my eye. The portrait of a young boy, no more than 12 years old, stared back at me. His hair was the same shade as mine, deep brown, nearly black, but where my eyes were pale green, his were dark enough to burn from a distance. He was smiling as always, his hands clasped in his lap, his dark school uniform without a wrinkle, Clancy Gray, Thurman's first inmate. There were at least 2 framed pictures of him in the mess hall, one in the kitchen, several nailed outside of the green outhouses. It was easier to remember his face than it was to remember my mom's. I forced myself to look away from his proud, unwavering grin. He may have gotten out, but the rest of us were still here. As I tried to readjust my body, I knocked Dr. Bigby's clipboard off my lap into the crook of my left arm. I knew there was a chance that they were watching, but I didn't care, not then, when I had seen answers inches away from my fingertips. Why had she left it there, right below my nose? If she hadn't wanted me to see it, why hadn't she taken it with her, like all of the doctors would have done? What was different about the white noise? What did they figure out? The fluorescent light above me were exposed, glowing in the shape of long, angry bones. They gave off a hum, sounding more and more like a cloud of flies swirling around in my ears. It only got worse as I flipped the clipboard over. It wasn't my medical history. It wasn't my current injuries, or lack thereof. It wasn't my answers to Dr. Begbie's questions. It was a note, and it read, "New CC was testing for undetected YOs reds. Your bad reaction means that they know you aren't G. Unless you do exactly as I say, they will kill you tomorrow." My hands were shaking. I had to set the clipboard down in my lap to read the rest. "I can get you out. Take the 2 pills under this note before bed, but don't let the PSFs see you. If you don't, we'll keep your secret, but I can't protect you while you're in here. Destroy this." It was signed, "A friend, if you like." I read the note one more time before I ripped it out under the metal clip and shoved it in my mouth. It tasted like the bread they served us for lunch. The pills were tiny, clear bag, clipped on top of my real medical chart. Scrawled in Dr. Begbie's dismissal handwriting was the note, "Subject 3285 hit her head against the ground and lost consciousness. Nose was fractured when subject 3285 elbowed her. Possible concussion." My eyes were itching to look up, to peer into the black eye of the camera, but I didn't let myself. I took the pills and shoved them into my standard issue sports bra the camp controllers had bestowed on us when they realized 1,500 teenage girls weren't going to stay 12 and flat forever. I didn't know what I was doing. I really didn't. My heart was racing so fast that for a moment I couldn't get any air. Why had Dr. Begbie done this to me? She knew I wasn't green, but she had covered it up, lied on the report. Was this just a trick? To see if I would incriminate myself? I pressed my face to my hands. The packet of pills burned against my skin. "They will kill you tomorrow." Why did they even bother to wait? Why not take me out to the buses and shoot me now? Isn't that what they did with the others, the yellows, oranges, and reds? They killed them because they were too dangerous. I'm too dangerous? I didn't know how to use my abilities. I wasn't like the other oranges who could spout off commands and slip nasty little thoughts into other people's minds. I had all the power and none of the control, all of the pain and none of the benefits. From what I'd been able to figure out, I had to touch someone for my ability to take hold, and even then, it was more like I was glimpsing their thoughts rather than screwing with them. I'd never tried to push a thought into someone else's head, and it wasn't like I'd had the opportunity or the desire to try. Every slip of the mind, intentional or not, left my head a jumble of thoughts and images, words and pain. It took hours to feel like myself again. Imagine someone reaching straight into your chest, past the bones and blood and guts, and taking a nice firm hold on your spinal cord. Now imagine that they started shaking you as fast as the world starts bulging and buckling under you. Imagine not being able to figure out later if the thought in your head is really yours or an unintentional keepsake from someone else's mind. Imagine the guilt of knowing you saw someone's deepest, darkest fear or secret. Imagine having to face them the next morning and pretend you didn't see how their father used to hit them. The bright pink dress they wore on their 5th birthday party, their fantasies about this boy or that girl, and the neighborhood animals they used to kill for fun. And then imagine the soul-crushing migraine that always follows, lasting anywhere between a few hours and a few days. That was what it was like. That was why I tried to avoid my mind so much as brushing up against someone else's at all costs. I knew the consequences, all of them. And now I knew for certain what would happen if they found me out. I flipped the clipboard over on my lap, and just in time, the same PSF soldier was back at my curtain again, ripping it aside. "You'll be returning to your cabin now," he said. "Come with me." My cabin? I searched his face for any sign of a lie, but saw nothing except the usual annoyance. A nod was the only thing I could muster. My entire body was one earthquake of dread, and the moment my feet touched the ground, the back of my head uncorked. Everything spilled out, every thought, fear, and image. I collapsed against the guardrail, holding on tight to consciousness. The black spots were still gliding in front of my eyes when the PSF barked out, "Hurry it up! Don't think you get to stay another night here just by putting on an act." Despite the harsh words, I saw the slightest flicker of fear in his face. The moment the shift from fear to fury could have summed up the feelings of every soldier at Thurman. We'd heard rumors that service in the military was no longer voluntary, that everyone between the ages of 22, and 40 had to serve. Most of them in the Army's new PSI branch. I gritted my teeth. The whole wide world spun under me, trying to pull me back down to its dark center. The PSF's words returned to me. Another night? I thought, how long have I been here? Still woozy, I followed the soldier into the hallway. Their infirmary was only 2 stories, small ones. The ceiling crept down so low that even I felt like I was in danger of scraping the top of my head on the door frames. The treatment beds were on the 1st floor, but the 2nd was reserved for kids needing to go into what we called timeout. Sometimes they had something the rest of us could catch, but mostly it was for kids that went completely off their rocker, broken brains, broken further by Thurman. I tried to stay focused on the movement of the PSF's shoulder blades beneath his black uniform, but it was difficult when most of the curtains had been left open for anyone to peer inside. Most I could ignore, or cast only a brief glance their way. but the second to last stall before the exit doors. My feet slowed on their own accord, giving my lungs time to breathe. In the scent of rosemary, I could hear Dr. Bigby's gentle voice as she spoke to another kid in green. I recognized him. His cabin was directly across from mine. Matthew? Maybe Max. All I knew was that there was blood on his face too, crusted around his nose and eyes, smearing across his cheeks. A stone dropped in my stomach. Had this green been marked too? Was Dr. Begbie cutting him the same deal? I couldn't have been there for only... I couldn't be the only one to figure out how to dodge the sorting system, who to influence, when to lie. Maybe he and I were the same color beneath our skin, and maybe when we would both be dead by tomorrow. Keep up, the PSF snapped. He didn't try to hide his annoyance as I hobbled after him, but he didn't need to worry. I couldn't have paid me to stay in the infirmary, not while I was conscious, not even with the new threat hanging over my head. I knew what they used to do there. I knew what was under the layers of white paint. The earliest kids they had brought in, the first guinea pigs, had been subjected to a whole array of electroshock and brain chop shop terrors. Stories were passed around the camp with sick, almost holy reverence. The scientists were looking for ways to strip the kids' abilities, rehabilitate them, but they had mostly just stripped their will to live. The ones who made it out were given warden positions when the first small wave of kids was brought to camp. It was a strange bit of luck and timing that I had come in during the second wave. Each wave grew larger and larger as the camp expanded until 3 years ago they'd run out of space completely. There were no new buses after that. I still wasn't moving fast enough for the soldier. He pushed me forward into the hall of mirrors. The exit sign cast its gory light over us. The PSF shoved me again, harder, and smiled when I fell. Anger flooded through me, cutting through the lingering pain in my limbs, and any fear I had that he was taking me out somewhere in order to finish the job. Soon we were standing outside, breathing in the damp spring air. I took a lungful of misty rain and swallowed the bitterness down. I needed to think, assess. If he was taking me outside to be shot and was on his own, I could easily overpower him. That wasn't the issue. But in fact, I had no way of slipping past the electric fence and no idea where the hell I was. When they had brought me to Thurman, the familiarities of the scenery had been more a comfort than a painful reminder. West Virginia, and Virginia aren't all that different, even though Virginians would have you believe otherwise. Same trees, same sky, same awful weather. I was either drenched in rain or sticky with humidity. Anyway, it might not have been West Virginia at all. But a girl in my cabin swore up and down that she had seen a Welcome to West Virginia sign on her ride in. So, that was the theory we were working with. The PSF had slowed considerably, matching my pathetic face. He fumbled once or twice against the muddy grass, nearly tripping over himself in full view of the soldiers high above on the control tower. The moment the tower came into view, a whole new weight added itself to the ball of chain of terror I was dragging behind me. The building itself wasn't that imposing. It was only called the tower because it stuck up like a broken finger in a sea of one-story wooden shacks arranged in rings. The electric fence was the outer ring, protecting the world from us freaks. Cabins of greens made up the next two rings, blues the next two rings before they were taken away. The few reds and oranges lived in the next rings. They'd been closest to the tower. Better, the controllers thought, to keep an eye on them, but after a red had blown up his cabin, they moved the reds farther away, using the greens as a buffer in case any of the real threats tried to make a run for the fence. Number of escape attempts? 5. Number of successful escape attempts? 0. I don't know of one blue or green who had ever tried to make a run for it. When kids did stage desperate, pathetic breakouts, it had been a small group of reds, oranges, and yellows. Once caught, they never came back. But that was in the earlier days, when we had more interactions with other colors, and before they shuffled us around. The empty red, orange, and yellow cabins became blue cabins and newly arriving greens. The biggest group of all filled the old blue ones. The camp grew so large that the controllers staggered our schedules, so we ate by color and gender, and even then it was still a tight squeeze, fitting everyone at the table. I hadn't seen a boy my own age up close in years. I didn't start breathing again until the tower was at our backs, and it was clear, beyond a shadow of a doubt, where we were headed. Thank you, I thought, to no one in particular. The relief lodged in my throat like a stone. We reached cabin 27 a few minutes later. The PSF walked me to the door and pointed to the spigot just to the left of it. I nodded and used the cold water to wash the blood off my face. He waited silently, but not patiently. After a few seconds, I felt his hand grab the back of my shirt and yank me up. Using his other hand, he slid his access card through the lock on our door. Ashley, one of the older girls in my cabin, shoved the door open the rest of the way. with her shoulder. She took my arm in one hand and nodded in the direction of the PSF. That seemed to be enough for him. Without another word, he took off down the path. Jesus Christ, she hissed as she dragged me inside. They couldn't have kept you another night? Oh no. They have to send you back early. Is that blood? I waved her hands away, but Ashley pushed past the others and brushed my long, dark hair over my shoulders. At first, I didn't understand why she was looking at me like that, with wide eyes rimmed with a raw pink. She sucked her bottom lip in between her teeth. I really thought we were still standing by the door, but I could feel the chill that had taken over the cabin. It settled over my skin like cold silk. Ashley had been around these parts for far too long to really crack, but I was still surprised to see her so frazzled, at a loss for what to say. She and a few other girls were honorary leaders of our sad, mismatched group, nominated mostly because they hit certain bodily milestones for the rest of us and could explain what was happening to us without laughing in our faces. I offered a weak smile and a shrug. Suddenly, without words again, but she didn't look convinced, and she didn't let go of my arm. The cabin was dark and damp. The usual smell of mold clung to every surface, but I would have taken that over the infirmary's clean, sterile stench any day. Let me. Ashley took a deep breath. Let me know if you're not. Got it? And what would you do about it? I wanted to ask. Instead, I turned to the back left corner of our cramped cabin. Whispers and stares followed my zigzag path around the rows of bunk beds. The pills tucked tight against my chest felt like they were on fire. She was gone, I heard someone say. Vanessa, who slept on the bottom bunk to the right of mine, had snuck up to Sam's bed. When I came into view, they stopped mid-conversation to stare down at me, eyes wide, mouths wider. The sight of them together was still sickening to me, even after a year. How many days and nights had I spent perched up there with Sam, steadfastly ignoring Vanessa's attempts to drag us into some stupid, pointless conversation. Sam's best friend slot had been vacant for less than 2 hours when Vanessa had slithered in, and not a day went by that Vanessa didn't remind me of that. What? Sam leaned over the edge of her bed. She didn't look haughty or hostile the way she usually did. She looked concerned, curious. What happened to you? I shook my head, my chest tight with all the things I wanted to say. Vanessa let out a sharp laugh. Nice. Real nice. And you wonder why she doesn't want to be your friend anymore? I don't, she mumbled. Whatever. Sometimes I wondered If there was a part of Sam that remembered not just me, but the person she used to be before I ruined her. Amazing how I had managed to erase every good part of Sam, or at least all the parts I loved. One touch and she was gone. A few girls asked me what happened between the two of us. Most, I think, assumed Sam was being cruel when she claimed that we had never, ever been friends and never would be. I tried to play it off with shrugs, but Sam was the only thing that had made Thurman bearable. Without her, it was no life at all. No life at all. I fingered the packet of pills. Our cabin was brown on brown on brown. The only color was the white of our sheets, and most of those had aged to an ugly yellow. There were no shelves of books, no posters, no pictures, just us. I crawled onto my low bunk, dropping face first into the worn sheets. I breathed in the familiar scent, bleach, sweat, something distinctly earthly, and tried not to listen to the conversation above me. A part of me had been waiting, I think, desperate, to see if I could fix what I had done to my friend. But it was done. It was over and she was gone, and the only one to blame was me. The best thing I could do for her was disappear, even if Dr. Begbie was playing me, and they really were going to get rid of me. They wouldn't connect us. They wouldn't question or punish Sam because they thought she had helped me hide, like they would if we had still been friends. There were over 3,000 of us at Thurman, and I was the last orange, maybe in the entire world, or one of two if the boy in the infirmary was like me. It had only been a matter of time before they found out the truth. I was dangerous, and I knew what they did to the dangerous ones. The camp routine ran itself through, as it always did, churning us through the mess hall for dinner, to the washrooms, and back to the cabins for the night. The light was dim and fading outside, clinging to the first fringes of night. "All right, kittens," Ashley's voice. 10 minutes till lights out. Whose turn is it? Mine. Should I just pick up from where we left off? Rachel was on the other side of the room, but her squeaky voice carried well. I could practically hear Ashley's eyes rolling. "Yes, Rachel. Isn't that what we always do?" "Okay, so the princess." She was in her tower, and she was still really sad. "Girl," Ashley cut in, "you're going to have to spice this up, or I'm skipping your boring ass and going to the next person." "Okay," Rachel squeaked. I rolled over onto my side, trying to get a glimpse of her through the rows of bunk beds. The princess was in terrible pain. Terrible, terrible pain. "Oh, God," was Ashley's only comment. "Next." Macy picked up the loose story threads the best she could, while the princess was locked away in her tower. All she could think about was the prince. I missed how the story ended, my eyelids too heavy to keep them open. If there was a single thing I'll miss about Thurman, I thought as I edged toward sleep, it's this. The quiet moments when we were allowed to talk about forbidden things. We had to find a way to amuse ourselves because we had no stories, no dreams, no future, other than the ones we created for ourselves. I swallowed the 2 pills at one time, the taste of chicken broth still on my tongue. The cabin lights had been off for 3 hours, and Sam had been snoring for 2. I unsealed the bag and dropped the little pills into my hands. The clear bag went back into my bra, and the first pill went into my mouth. It was warm from being so close to my skin for so long, which didn't make it any easier to swallow. I popped the next one in before I lost the nerve and winced as it clawed its way down my throat. And then I waited. And that is the end of chapter 4. Thank you all for being here. And again, don't forget to like and subscribe. Until next time, Ruby out.